Thank you for staying with us. Professor Ademola Abbas joins us for this next conversation. He's a professor of international law, and he's also a global affairs expert. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's make this a relay. Let's start from where we just ended. You're a professor of international law, so you should be able to speak to the Supreme Court ruling and the issue of the federation and federal government, which is like a response of the Attorney General of the Federation to it. Start with the Supreme Court ruling and some of the comments that you heard from the SAN who spoke with us earlier.
Thank you very much, and nice seeing you, both of you. Happy New Year, and to your colleagues in Abuja, Marpe and Chamberlain, because I've not been here since the year started. Well, look, 3 state governments went to the Supreme Court. But don't let's forget to seek an injunctive order. It's an injunction restraining the federal government from going ahead with the February 10th ban, so to say, on the old currency. It's in the right of the state to do that, number one. Let's start with that. Now, but we shouldn't also forget that the order they sought was an injunction, which was granted, it's an interim injunction, granted ex parte, which means to the knowledge of the other parties. And normally a court will look at, when you bring an action for an ex parte or interim injunction, is there an overwhelming thing that you want to avoid so as not to bring the other party against whom you are procuring the order into the court? And the court felt at that point in time, and if you go back to what the 3 governors, government actually brought forth, they talk about impending anarchy, that if the Supreme Court didn't act in time, because of the chaos we've been witnessing already all over the country, there is likelihood to be anarchy in Nigeria. So that will meet the threshold. Because when you grant an injunctive relief or injunction, as we call it, whether interim or interlocutory, it is ex parte mostly. Ex parte means to the knowledge of the other party. So it was against the what is it called, the federal government, but they weren't aware at that point in time, obviously. And what the court will do in granting judgment will be to take a particular date, a very short date, to then allow the other party to come to court and come and argue what is called the substantive case itself. So the substantive case will be argued on the 15th. Now, that is the judgment itself. However, the effect of that judgment is that at least until the court is able to then hear the substantive issue on the 15th of February, you are bound to obey the court order. So I listened with a bit of worry what the gentleman was talking about, that, look, whether the CBN was party to the case or not, the CBN of Nigeria, the CBN is an agency of the federal government of Nigeria. So when a judgment is directed against the federal government, it binds all the agencies of the government.
So where is the argument coming from, which is putting out a lot of confusion to so many people that, who say that the Supreme Court's judgment is not binding on the CBN?
All I can say is that I read law differently, maybe in different years, and the gentleman read his own law different, without being insolent, because I don't understand. Whether you are CBN, you are INEC, you anything, even in your bedroom, the law of this country binds you, regardless of if you have any problem with the law, with the judgment of the court, you go back to the court. But you cannot begin to nitpick and say because you are not party to the suit and this and that. No, CBN wasn't party to the suit, yes, but your principal is the federal government of Nigeria.
But you also heard him say that the CBN, well, the president is not the boss of the CBN governor, even though,
Ayo, there was a lot of speculation in that segment, and I'm just sort of trying to be a bit malleable here. I had so many speculations, and I don't really pander to speculations. But the truth is, whether the president of Nigeria is the boss of CBN or the boss of INEC or anything, the truth is, he is the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria at the apex, and all these parastatals are under the federal government, which the president, look, it's just what we call vicarious liability in law. Let me just briefly. I'm a principal, you are my agent, I send you on an errand to go and buy maybe pap for me in Yaba. On your way to Yaba, you carry my car, you knock somebody down in the process of going to buy that pap for me in Yaba, and you are sued. I will be vicariously liable for what you have done because you are running my errand at that point in time. It's a different thing if when I send it to you, you're about to go and buy pap for me, you deflected and went to really on your own frolic, which had nothing to do with where I sent you. On that occasion, I shall not be vicariously liable to your act because you didn't commit the act in the ordinary course of where I sent you. But in this case, you're talking about the CBN taking a policy sanctioned by the President of Nigeria. So the judgment, of course, you know, is a judgment that binds the federal government, including the CBN and all other parastatals included. So don't let's waste time on this.
And in citing the CBN Act, you know, the senior advocate talked about how the approval required by the president on currency redesign by the CBN is only perfunctory. And the question, you know, in relation to that is, how much weight does the approval that the president gives to currency redesign and any other policy relating to the current, how much weight does it carry?
No, thank you so much. That's a very interesting question. So Nigeria is, I was talking to an elderly friend of mine a couple of days ago. I said Nigeria is a UFO. It's now an unidentified flying object. Anything goes in Nigeria. You cite it, you don't cite it. We throw a lot of things, you know, into the mix of law sometimes. So the whole idea that the president has, you know, given approval or the approval is just perfunctory is not. You know, what is important is there are constitutional rules for the president, one of which is to give approval to A, B, C, whether it is a general approval or by executive order whatsoever. So the approval cannot be perfunctory. You know, you remember a few weeks ago when there was an instance in which somebody said they needed the approval of the president to arrest somebody. I think it was Emefiele they were talking about. I think there was this rumor about arrest, and somebody said, oh, I think the court said you have to go, I think the court told the DSS, if I remember very well, that you have to go and take approval from the from the president to arrest the CBN governor. I said, hell no. You don't need the approval of Mr. President to arrest anybody in this country because it's a constitutional matter. It gives the police in a functional country, in a functional democracy. We are in a different, you know, ball game altogether. But in a country that works, the police can, look, the other day, a couple of weeks ago, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, was fined because he was sitting on the back of his car without a sitting belt, without a belt. And ordinary police arrested him and stopped him, and he paid a fine to that. You know, so we're talking about why do you have to go to the president or please, sir? Can you give us permission to arrest? Now, would the DSS need the permission of the federal government or president to come and arrest them all up? I say, hell no. So the DSS should need nobody's permission, even if the president appoints and fires people. No question, that's a different ball game. You know, but when it comes to arresting those people that the president appoints to arrest, nobody needs the presidential approval for that. It's the same thing.
It expands the, it speaks to so many other issues on this particular matter. For instance, there are those, of course, you are very well aware, who are alluding, and perhaps that's where you actually want to go, to the fact that this whole conversation is not just about on the substantive issue of the conversation, but it's all getting into the realm of politics, which is, to many, a little disturbing. Should we be talking politics in such a mix as this? We had a guest yesterday who said, look, this issue is not supposed to be a political issue, it's supposed to be an economic issue. But it would seem like we kind of put everything in the same pot of soup.
Thanks. That's a very, very important question. Look, when there is no information, rumors will fill the gap. And rumors will fill your imagination. Let me say straight away that the whole idea of saying you want to redesign Naira, you know, in order to be able to, you know, absorb Naira and this and that, could be, or in order to promote a cashless economy, on its own, could be a fantastic idea. But you have to look at the implementation. And that is the biggest problem with Nigeria. We don't think things through. Number one, the first question is, and that's coming back to why politics is being thrown into this mix sometimes. Why do you have to implement that about 3-4 months before a major election in the country, in a place that you know you want to promote cashless economy, where 60% of Nigerians don't own bank accounts? This is a statistic coming from the CBN itself. People are in the hinterlands where there are no banks at all. You know, even when you are in the urban areas, you transfer, sometimes your money is hanging, it doesn't drop. And don't just forget, the infrastructure for cashless economy is not just the bank. You have the telecoms, you know, who also runs on. No, do we have the infrastructure in the first place? We haven't got the infrastructure to pilot this through. In some of the best, most developed countries in the world, the UK, US, Germany, and co, this would take about, when UK was going to do its own, if you want to, last year, they gave almost 5 or 6 months. And they still said, keep on depositing your old currency. And the old currency and the currency were actually operating side by side until they fizzled it out completely. I'm talking about a country that has all the infrastructure we need. We are in a country that we haven't got 20% or even 10% of the infrastructure we need for that. Then you went up suddenly, I mean, and that has promoted all the speculations. I heard the last gentleman talking about the fact that, oh, this was done because they want to make sure that the politicians don't use money to buy vote. Number one, I haven't seen anything to that effect. If that is the case, there are more sensible ways of doing that. You know, you don't wake up one day and then say 3 months to the election, do this so that we want to suck up. This is what you have done. You've completely imperiled the Nigerians. You told us to surrender our old currencies. We did. The new currencies you promised, you haven't given us. Let me give you an example. As I was driving from Ogun State today to this studio, a gentleman came to do something in my house. And as I was bringing him back to Lagos, he lives in Lagos. And I was going to give him money. I had to transfer. He says, I use Zenith. And Zenith has not been going for the past 2 or 3 days. Whether you transfer to or you want to receive, so it will be hanging. I had no money in my pocket, but 1,000 naira. And I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? Thankfully, I used another bank, GTB, and I said, do you have a GTB account? And he gave me his wife's account number. And I was able to. Now, at that point in time, if that guy didn't have an alternative this thing, he has kids. Meanwhile, he was going to another job, and he said the gentleman transferred money to him yesterday. The money had not dropped in because that was one bank to Zenith hasn't dropped. And I'm thinking, how did we get here? So the long and short is that the way this is being done leaves a lot of room for speculations and for politics.
Speaking of which, let's break it down. The CBN says it has released the money to the banks, but the banks are not managing it well. The banks are saying that we're challenging the CBN on the quantity released into circulation. We see cash merchants selling cash. POS operators have upped, their percentage charge on withdrawals. What exactly, do you see politics in this? Add to that, we also see banks whose managers have been arrested hoarding the new notes behind old notes in their vaults. Do you see politics in this mix as well? How come this is happening at this time?
You see, this is very disheartening. Because what goes on between, and number one, I have to say straight away on national television, I don't trust a word of Emefiele. I don't trust anything that comes from his mouth. Because, I'm sorry to say, he's shown consistently that at most times he doesn't stand for integrity. And I'll tell you why. You are the CBN governor, and you wanted to run for a political post, the presidency of the country, and you were denied. You are the one who is a custodian of the materials, of the electoral materials in this country, that they are going to be disbursing to different. If you have any modicum of integrity, you should resign. Nobody needed to tell you at that point in time to resign.
Because there are those who wonder, did he ever really say he wanted to contest?
But he didn't come out to say he didn't want to contest.
Okay.
And if you keep silent in certain circumstances, I could very well infer, consent at that point in time. And I think the noise was so loud enough for him, even if he was deaf, for someone to tell him, this has been impugned on you. You are the central bank governor, for goodness sake. So, and because of that, it's a bit tricky in that. So if he says, I've given money to bankers, commercial banks, they're not releasing money. Look, this is not the business of the average Nigerian, of the common man on the street, of the common woman on the street. They don't care how much you release to the commercial bank. Put your house in order. I was telling somebody yesterday, this kind of discussion came up because they were attacking banks in Abeokuta and this and that. And the person asked me that, was it right to attack the banks? I said, look, it's not right to attack the banks, but you can say that because you are not in the hinterland, because you are not that old woman who is a daily worker, who is going to peddle orange on the street. The money she gets on the street, the cash she gets, is what she's going to give to her children when they are going to school in the morning. She's living 300 miles from the city center. I said, look, that is why we call it anarchy. In anarchy, there is no sensibilities. Only you're ruled by emotions. So Emefiele should sit with his bankers and resolve this. It's a national calamity. It's a shame to come on national television and say, oh, I release this amount to the people. Oh, I don't really. It is the whole thing has become seriously politicized. It is an indictment.
Well, that also
on the CBN as an entity.
That's not the only one that old woman whose analogy you just gave is dealing with right now. There are 3 queues people are talking about now. I'm sure you're aware of. Fuel queues,
Naira queues,
cash
or
queues,
ATM queues,
POS queues, all kinds of queues all over the place. And all people hear is an allegation that all of this is political because some of these things haven't happened until now. What's your argument, or are you in favor or against that argument that this is all political to make the government of the day look bad? Because there are those who allege, hey, we haven't really had this kind of experience over the years. Why now?
Well, this is interesting and very tricky. First, the question of whether some people have been arguing that is to make the government, of the day bad. I think we've had that kind of argument from the highest level. I mean, Nasser El-Rufai said that about people in Nasser Rock trying to make sure that a candidate loses and so on and so forth. Look, and then you said this has never happened before. It has happened before, but in tiers and breaks. Only we have never had a convergence of all the queues as we've had now. Before it's been Naira queue or it's been fuel queue. I think the only entity that is not queuing in Nigeria today is INEC. Because the INEC chairman came out to tell us, oh, we're going to have the elections, because now we have resolved the Naira and the fuel issues. I was horrified. Are you going to vote for yourself? INEC. It's okay for you to say, oh, we've got Naira now, we've got Naira and we've got fuel. What about the people who are going to vote at the end of the day? Have they got that to be able to vote? But that just shows you the level of insensitivity in government. But that's it's a discussion for another day. But coming back, to that. The queues have happened before. They're going to happen again. But are they political? It's a big question. It's a big question because nobody can say precisely what it is. As I said, if you look at the Naira queue, the policy itself is not a bad policy, obviously, but the timing is greatly flawed. Then the nastiness and the opaqueness around it, leave so much room for people to begin to fill the gaps with imagination. Because, look, to be honest with you, if I were one of the contestants and people need to move from point A to point B when they are going to exercise their, civic right to vote, and suddenly there's no money, they cannot move, they can't procure anything, they cannot even, they have no one to even buy food to be able to eat, to even go. And don't forget, when you go to queue, you queue for 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes, or even longer than that. So you are disenfranchising people from that point of view. Then the same thing, even those who have money, there's no petrol to buy anyway, to be able to move about, to be able to do anything. So what you have on ground today is a panoply of factors that leaves enough room for anybody to say what is going on is political. But I dare say there will be other reasons to it.
It would be remiss of us, to have this conversation without taking it to the president, who has repeatedly restated his commitment to leaving a legacy of free and fair elections. Can that commitment now be viewed independently of the upheaval that is characterizing days to the elections now?
I think the short shrift answer is absolutely not. How do you want to have free and fair elections? If I'm not, look, free and fair election doesn't simply mean that the ballots have been casted and you've counted them. No. You have to look at the processes. It's just like when you talk about justice being done. People confuse justice with judgment. They're different things entirely. If a court pronounces judgment today, and somebody might say, yes, I've got justice. You haven't got justice if the process leading to that has been very traumatic in the first place. When the police arrest you and they detain you longer than what the Constitution allows them to detain you, you've already suffered injustice. So it's a chain completely. So free and fair election is a chain. It's not just casting the ballot itself. You have made it almost impossible for Nigerians today to breathe, to even think correctly, to even think in a straight manner, to eat, to feed, to do anything. How can those kind of human beings be able then to deliver any election that you call free and fair? It's a big question.
Well, there will be no elections without political parties. And one of the interesting things that we've seen in recent time, is a lot of decamping.
Oh, yeah.
From one party to the other. In fact, we've had all kinds of lists, all kinds of people, coming from one party into another. We took on a guest here saying, look, about 62,000 of his candidates, or of members of his party, had moved from one party to another, and of course he had his say on that one. The natural question would be, exactly what does that mean in the build-up to an election, a major election at that? And no party, none of the major political parties have been exempt in recent time. What does that carry any weight in the build-up to this process, as you call it?
Well, thank you very much, Ayo. That's a very, very interesting question. And if you want to throw into that mix, also is a question of attributions and stuff like that. But let me address the campaign. And Nigeria is, to be honest with, as far as I'm concerned, you haven't got political parties in Nigeria. You only got associations of aggregated interests here and there. Because when you have political parties in the proper form they're supposed to be, you can't decamp easily. Now, take as an example, if you're a Democrat in the US, or you're in the Republican Party, or in the UK you're in Labour, or you're in Conservative, certain ideological values define you. You believe in abortion, you don't believe in abortion, you believe in gay rights, you don't believe in gay rights, and this and that. Sometimes your beliefs, if I don't ask you that, Ayo, in the US, where do you belong? Which party do you belong? If I ask you your values, do you believe in gay? You said no, or yes. Do you believe in this? Already I can tell myself, Ayo belongs, or Bukola belongs to this particular party. Your values actually sometimes shape the kind of party you belong. But Nigerian political parties across board have no ideological values at all that distinguish one from the other. So because of that, they don't see it as anything significant, just carpet crossing, just like changing, I'm wearing a shirt, I'm drinking tea, it's stained, I take it off, I take another shirt. That is what it has become. So people decamp here, sometimes they decamp to go and contest presidency or governorship in another party and this and that. Sometimes your electorate should even worry about that.
Unfortunately, that's what we have right now.
That's what we have. Your electorate should worry about that, about your consistency. Now, look, so the campaign, number one, happens because, A, as I said, there is no ideological values. Number two, political parties even politicians don't think too much of their parties. Their parties are places they go to go and get benefits. Now, let me use myself as an example. I registered in Lagos here as an APC member. I served in an APC government of Governor Ambode in Lagos. And I'm still a card-carrying member of the APC as I talk today. But that doesn't stop me from joining initiatives that are not political parties, but are very, very, forward-thinking. Like one of them was established by Professor Patutomi about 2 years ago, called the National Consultative Front. You had guests here on this platform, NCF. NCF was brilliant. And that idea came when we thought part of the problems we have in Nigeria is that people are put in offices who don't have competencies for it. What if we start the idea of shadow government? Whether you are in any party or not, when you have a minister for education, in the NCF, let's have a shadow minister for education, not affiliated to any party, who will be able to study all the policies on education and this and that. So if one day comes, you are called upon, you already know what all those policies are. So, and I was very happy, and I'm still a member of that NCF. However, some people, when it will be dirty or whatever happened, some people decamped or some people moved from that to join this. I didn't, and many people didn't. I stayed with NCF. And simply because I'm still an APC member, and talking about, so there was, an attribution, I think there was a list published about 3 months ago that some of us are a member of some big tent, which is a policy group of Obidati. I said, no, I'm not a member of that. I work with Patutomi on his NCF. That's
it's an interesting...
No, sorry, just make it. So you were added to...
A list, yeah.
Okay, so, it also raises a question in my mind right now.
Yeah.
So it is possible for a political party to come up with a list of appointees without verifying whether or not they are members of a party.
That happens a lot in Nigeria. That happens a lot. It happens also, sometimes it happens deliberately, I must say. Sometimes it happens genuinely, and sometimes it happens through confusion. Because, for instance, I was in the NCF, for instance, which was long before this B movement or anything happened. But when people moved on to that, they must have imagined, because that list, when I saw the list, was the list of NCF simply adapted to the big tent. And I said, no, whoa, whoa. You can't just put me there without my consent. It's not. I'm just giving an example. Maybe I have the opportunity to come here and say, look, I'm an APC member state, APC member. I haven't joined any other thing apart from the APC, you know. But it doesn't mean that those who are free, those who want to join shouldn't join the other. I'm just saying all those things happen. It could have happened genuinely. So it could have happened unintentionally.
You were honorable enough to decline membership of, you know, the other group. But there are other people who could have been drafted into the big tent, you know, without necessarily telling them that, you know, this is my ideological disposition, I would rather not be part of it.
Precisely. I mean, I wasn't actually told of that list at all. That my name just appeared in it. When I then looked at it, I thought this was a list of the NCF. How did it become adapted to? But the truth is, people get drafted into all sorts. And maybe not everybody will have the opportunity of me sitting on the TV and saying, you know.
And that brings me to the next point. You know, some would say, and I've heard this, you know, on conversations on television, some would say that there really is no ideological dividing line between and amongst the presidential candidates that we have on the ballot right now. If you're talking about the PDP presidential candidate, he was formerly in the ACN and then the APC. If you're talking about the Labour Party presidential candidate, he was formerly a PDP member. Even the NNPP presidential candidate was formerly a PDP member. So it seems like it's an APC against all PDP contests. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that's a fantastic point, Bukola, because you've mentioned all those parties. You haven't mentioned Asiwaju. Asiwaju is the only candidate today who has not crossed from any party to another, just as what you are saying. Somebody moved from PDP to Labour, somebody moved from...
But don't forget that in the 90s, they were all, at least a handful of these candidates were all in the SDP as well.
I understand, but then don't forget that SDP went, ACN came. It's a different thing entirely.
Asiwaju was a member of Alliance for Democracy,
AD, precisely in 1990.
Also,
and he left that one to form the ACN.
That's what I'm saying.
ACN
to APC. That's what I'm saying. So you can see that consistency of the same party evolving from this to that. Just like when Awolowo was in Egbe Modua, from there became Action Group, basically. What I'm saying is that Asiwaju has done that consistently. I'm not campaigning for anybody here, but just to your question, I'm just saying, if you want to talk about consistency in that way, you were in AD, you moved to ACN, then from ACN to APC. There is consistency there. In terms of ideology, then I can see that if there's ideological trend there, because it's a different thing if Asiwaju has moved from, you know, ACN to something to the other side. But he didn't do that. He was consistent from AD to ACN, from ACN to APC. But don't let's waste too much effort on that. In the fact that at least there's consistency there. To that extent, you can say, well, there is at least, if not ideological consistency, there's at least that kind of whatever I hold as my belief in that party. He has held that consistently. And for me, look, this is an open platform. The truth is, when I'm looking today at who should be my president this year, 2023 going on, I'm looking at certain things. There are no angels among men, not among any of the candidates. But I'm looking at who is that candidate that can put together the best and the most formidable team to govern Nigeria, because we need that kind of candidate now, as far as I'm concerned. The president of Nigeria is not somebody who's going to be running around the field on his own or on her own. Will be the person who will harness the best resources and then give them the best supervision.
Incidentally, Nigerians will be recruiting just one person.
Precisely.
Nigerians are going to be employing one individual to govern their lives at the federal level and 36 others to govern their lives at the states level.
28 this time.
28, okay. Now, so the question for you now is, now you have said what you would be looking out for. But in the face of prevailing circumstances, you said something very, very important the other time, which is people will be ruled by their emotions when things aren't going in a particular direction. So you are essentially saying at some point, reason goes out the window, emotions rule. What will be your counsel to Nigerians now about this conflict of reason and emotions as we wind down?
Thank you very much. It's a very refreshing question. Look, we don't have a crystal ball today. Otherwise, we will have all gazed into it to know what is going to come. But my counsel to Nigerians is very simple. We've gone through a hard time, and we are still going through a lot of hard times. let us look deep into ourselves. As I say, when I was driving in today, and that young man sitting next to me, when we were talking about, this anarchy, this and that, he said, but sir, many people will be happy that we are still alive. And I take pride in that we are still alive. He said it's only when you are alive that you can be hopeful. So we are alive today, so we can be hopeful. We can be hopeful that Nigeria is going to get better. In doing that, we should not allow ourselves to be too emotional. And you can see emotions already playing out. And it's normal. Again, let's say that it's normal that you are going to have emotions play out in different fields. Different emotions, or somebody is well, somebody is not well, somebody is sick, somebody is not saying this and that. Look beyond all this. Ask yourself some fundamental questions that, as I'm going to be casting my vote come February 25th for the president of the country, which kind of president do I want to see in power? I know the person I'll be voting for. I know the kind of president I want to see in power. I want to see somebody that I know has a track record of bringing the best team together. Because at the end of the day, even if you bring in a 10-year-old to come and govern Nigeria today, he or she is still going to have to work with people.
Even though, Prof, that a number of people would still say we give too much attention to the presidency and not give enough attention to the state governments, because that's another conversation altogether.
Sure.
That is where governance happens. But unfortunately, we are completely out of time now. We have to let you go. Professor Ademola Abbas is a professor of international law as well as a global affairs expert. Thank you again for your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're back after now for more. Please stay with us.